The roar of engines tore through the Pacific skies. On the horizon, tiny specks grew larger, Japanese planes diving straight toward Allied warships with no intention of returning. These were not ordinary attacks. They were human missiles, pilots willing to die for the chance to take an enemy vessel with them. For the sailors watching them descend, each second felt like an eternity, each moment a question. Would they survive the next impact or be swallowed by fire and steel? By late 1944, the Pacific War had entered its most desperate stage. The once mighty Japanese empire was collapsing under the relentless pressure of Allied forces. Island after island had been seized in bloody campaigns, and American fleets now loomed on Japan's doorstep. Fuel reserves were dwindling, factories lay in ruins from bombing raids, and the nation faced a crippling shortage of trained pilots. It was in this atmosphere of desperation that Japan turned to a weapon unlike any other: the kamikaze. The word itself meant divine wind, a reference to the legendary typhoons that had once saved Japan from Mongol invasion centuries earlier. But in the Second World War, it would take on a far darker meaning. Thousands of young men, many barely out of their teens, were ordered or convinced that their ultimate duty was to become living bombs. They were given only the most basic training, strapped into planes loaded with explosives, and sent on one-way missions against Allied ships. For the Allied sailors, the seas became a place of constant vigilance. Radar screens flickered with incoming signals, alarms wailed across decks, and every man knew that any approaching aircraft could be carrying death. These attacks were not random acts of madness. They were organized, coordinated, and relentless. The Pacific Ocean, already a graveyard of ships and men, was about to witness warfare at its most shocking and personal. The Allied fleets soon found themselves under constant siege. From dawn to dusk, waves of kamikaze aircraft descended upon them, each pilot determined to crash his machine into steel decks and ignite chaos. Combat air patrols, squadrons of Hellcats and Corsairs, launched from carriers to intercept, dueling in the skies in desperate attempts to thin the incoming swarm. But no defense was flawless. For every enemy fighter torn apart in the clouds, another slipped through, diving low and fast, a screaming engine carrying death. On the decks below, anti-aircraft crews fired relentlessly, their guns shaking the very hulls of their ships. Radar picket destroyers, stationed far ahead, bore the brunt of the first strikes, their role both vital and deadly. And yet, even with these layers of defense, the danger never ceased. The moment a kamikaze broke through, sailors braced themselves for impact, hearts pounding as they watched the enemy's final approach. It was not only a battle of weapons, but of nerves. Every man knew that survival depended on fractions of a second, whether a gunner could fire true, whether a pilot could intercept in time. Fear was constant, courage demanded, and tragedy always one heartbeat away. One of the most unforgettable moments came aboard the USS Missouri in April 1945. The battleship, pride of the U.S. Navy, was steaming off Okinawa when alarms shrieked across her decks. A kamikaze had broken through the defensive screen. Sailors scrambled to their stations as the plane roared toward them, its engine screaming, its pilot committed to a single, irreversible path. Anti-aircraft guns thundered, tracers cutting fiery arcs through the sky. But still the aircraft plunged forward. A heartbeat later, it struck the Missouri's side in a blinding flash of fire and twisted metal. The explosion ripped across the deck, showering the ship with debris. For an instant, it seemed as if the mighty battleship herself might falter. Yet, through smoke and flames, the crew held their ground. Fire control teams rushed in, sealing off the damage, while medics tended to the wounded. Against all odds, the Missouri remained unbroken. But what followed was even more remarkable. Amid the wreckage, the body of the kamikaze pilot was recovered. Rather than discard him as an enemy, Captain William Callahan made a decision that stunned his crew. He ordered a burial at sea, with full military honors. The man who had come to destroy them was laid to rest with dignity, a gesture of humanity in a war that often seemed to erase it. The kamikaze campaign would rage until the very final months of the war, a storm of fire and sacrifice hurled against the vast armadas of the Allies. More than 3,000 pilots gave their lives in these attacks, and though they inflicted terrible damage, sinking dozens of ships and wounding thousands of sailors, they could not turn the tide. Allied defenses had grown too strong. Radar-guided guns, combat air patrols, and the sheer discipline of crews ensured that most ships survived, battered but unbroken. In the end, only about 1 in 7 kamikaze missions struck its target. For the Japanese command, the tactic symbolized desperation, a last gamble when victory was already slipping away. For the Allied sailors, it left scars both physical and emotional, memories of sudden fireballs and the sight of men willingly diving to their deaths. And yet, amid the chaos, there were moments that defied hatred. The burial aboard the USS Missouri showed that even in war's darkest hours, respect for human life could still flicker through the smoke. History remembers the kamikaze not as a decisive weapon, but as a tragic testament to sacrifice and futility. Their attacks could wound, but they could not win. Instead, they became a haunting symbol of a nation pushed beyond desperation, and of the men who faced them with equal parts fear, courage, and resolve. When the war ended, the seas grew quiet again, but the echoes of those final dives still linger, reminders that even in total war, humanity is never fully extinguished.